The Fallout universe is a unique glimpse into what the world might look like post-nuclear apocalypse. The places we can visit and the people we interact with are colored by the dark reality that remains in the wake of a man-made extinction-level event. However, the people, locales, and environments don't always quite hit the mark, and the entire premise falls apart in the face of a little critical thinking. Welcome, viewer, to Lousy Lore, as we explore one of these troublesome little bits in the Fallout universe. Today's topic, Little Lamplight. It's the 23rd of October, 2077. School buses marked with Early Dawn Elementary School come to a stop outside Lamplight Caverns, a small tourist attraction west of Washington, D.C. Carrie Delaney leads her 4th grade class on their field trip into the caverns, along with another teacher and a few parents to help chaperone. It was an idyllic outing. The children got to learn about geology, the history of early settlers, and even got to catch a glimpse of the entrance to a real Vault-Tec vault. They were just getting ready to return to the buses when it happened. The ground began to shake violently, and a deafening roar echoed and reverberated throughout the caverns as dirt and debris clattered from the ceilings in a choking cloud. One of the parents went outside to see what had happened, only to return, his face white as a ghost and only able to utter the phrase, "mushroom clouds." The Great War was here. Over the next several weeks, the chaperones left the caves one by one as they desperately attempted to find help, only to disappear into the radioactive waste until finally, Miss Delaney, the last adult in the group, ventured out of the caverns, leaving her 4th graders to fend for themselves in the dark, dank passages. But this is not where our story ends. 200 years later, a vault dweller from Vault 101 arrived at Little Lamplight to find a self-sufficient society of children. They have everything a society in the bombed-out ruins of the capital Wasteland could hope for. A reliable source of food, a clinic, a schoolhouse, even a police force, and most importantly, safety from the horrors that roamed the surface. Led by Mayor Robert Joseph McCready, the settlers of Little Lamplight are surprisingly resilient and represent a total democracy, with all members of the society serving their posts only with the consent of the people. However, Little Lamplight isn't without its problems, as space within the caverns and the amount of food they can grow in the form of carnivorous fungi is limited. To prevent overpopulation, Lamplighters undergo a rite of passage on their 16th birthdays, where they receive a mungo party and are expected to leave the safety of Little Lamplight and go above ground to find their new home in the wonderful metropolis of Bigtown, which is populated almost exclusively of former Lamplighters. It just so happens that our brave vault dweller is willing to make the dangerous journey to Bigtown with a Lamplighter who by sheer coincidence is celebrating his 16th birthday when they arrive. Upon reaching Bigtown, we discover it's not actually a big town at all. Instead, it is a small, crumbling pre-war suburb similar to Sanctuary Hills in the Commonwealth. It is surrounded by an improvised wall of junk and debris, mostly consisting of inoperable automobiles, and is accessible from a single rope bridge suspended over a small radioactive pool of water. Trash lines the streets, the homes, and the public buildings. Virtually everyone who calls Bigtown home is bitter and resentful of Little Lamplight for casting them out of a comparable paradise, and are extremely unhappy as the settlement is constantly attacked by super mutants, slavers, and other scum of the wastes. The town doesn't seem to be able to muster more than a BB gun in its own defense. Most of the town is either wounded or taken by slavers and super mutants, including the town's doctor. The dweller can make their lives better by rescuing the doc from a muty den, saving another who has wounds too grave for her skills to repair, and taking action to either protect the town from super mutants or to teach the settlement to defend itself. However, even after all this, the fact remains that they are vulnerable and have plenty of reason to question their lot in life. Now, before we ask the obvious question that I'm sure has already filled the comment section, let's stop to take a look at Lamplight Society as a whole. For 200 years, Little Lamplight has apparently functioned as a total democracy. Anyone hoping to become mayor is elected by the people, but can just as quickly be deposed, such as in the case of Mayor Princess, who was replaced after just 5 minutes in office. Similarly, their schoolhouse operates democratically, with children choosing what and even if they study, with a couple notable exceptions being combat first aid and weapons handling, which is mandatory education for all Lamplighters. This study what you want model is very very attractive to modern Gen Y and Gen Z sensibilities, and there are actually a number of experimental schools in the United States today which allow students to build custom curriculum and learn at their own pace, with the faculty at these schools serving more as facilitators, coaches, and minor tutors rather than teachers. However, these modern democratized schools have the benefit of universally educated faculty and a larger population to pull from. In Little Lamplight, all it would take for an important skill to become lost forever would be a single generation to come along where no Lamplighters had the desire to learn it. Imagine the loss to their society if there were no Lamplighters willing to learn medicine, weapons maintenance, hell, basic reading skills. Their society would very quickly become illiterate and begin to crumble, as even if successive generations did wish to learn, picking up these new skills solely from books without the benefit of a mentor/tutor would be extremely difficult, and finer details would most certainly be lost. Taking a quick break, it would really mean a lot to me if you would just target the like button in advance and sink a few action points into it. Liking is completely painless, it's easy, and user engagement is a metric that we use to determine what sort of content you, the viewers, are interested in. Now on with the rest of the video. Now let's tackle the big one. You knew it was coming. Where do new Little Lamplighters come from? Well, when a mommy mungo and a daddy mungo love each other very much, okay, seriously, there are really only 3 places that new Lamplighters could come from. The first is by being born in Little Lamplight. Lamplighters aren't expected to leave until they turn 16, so this does leave them with about 2 to 4 childbearing years lived inside the caverns. So it is possible the older Lamplighters are just going at it like rabbits behind the scenes, but considering this is a title directed at Western audiences and our modern sensibilities tend to be horrified by the idea of children having children, this is probably not the case, at least not canonically. Additionally, based on the Dwellers' interactions with Lamplighters, it seems that most romantic relationships are quite juvenile in nature and often go unrequited, as Lamplighters tend to go out of their way to avoid behaviors that appear too grown up. Also, imagine being that Lamplighter who has to give the talk to all the other Little Lamplighters. Regardless of whether Lamplighters do join the Mile Deep Club, given the low population of Little Lamplight at any given time, and given that the average Lamplighter could only have 1 or 2 children tops before being kicked out, this is obviously not a sustainable way to replenish your population. So let's move on to the second option. Children are taken from the Wasteland. We do know that Little Lamplight organizes scouting parties meant to gather resources that can't be found in the caves. Medicine, preserved food, scrap metal, mechanical parts, weapons, ammo, all is important and all must be scavenged from the Wasteland. The capital Wasteland is a rough place to try and scratch out a living, and a vast majority of people fail to survive the attempt. It makes sense that if Lamplighters had come upon a scene where children had managed to survive a raiding party, that the children would be accepted into Lamplight Society. This can actually be witnessed if the Lone Wanderer chooses to send the orphan Brian Wilkes to Little Lamplight instead of Rivet City. So we know that Lamplighters will adopt children from time to time, but once again, this is an unsustainable method of replenishing their population, especially if any of these orphans had ever been to Bigtown and knew that the idyllic stories told to all Lamplighters about Bigtown were a complete fabrication. So this brings us to the final option, and that is that children are born in Bigtown and brought to Lamplight to be raised. This is possible, though not probable. There are no children in Bigtown as we see it in 2277, so there is the possibility that this is due to children all having been taken to Little Lamplight. After all, in circumstances where resources are scarce, it makes sense that a parent would be willing to sacrifice their personal relationship with their child if it meant that they could be raised in the relative safety and health of the caverns. However, we're ignoring the very simple fact that virtually every Bigtowner feels that they were lied to and left for dead by the Little Lamplighters by being forced out of the caves and into the squalor of Bigtown. They would have to accept that if they did return their child to Little Lamplight, that in 16 years, that child would be met with cruel reality just as they had, and given the constant dire state that Bigtown seems to be in, would they even expect that Bigtown would still be there for their child in 16 years? Thanks to Fallout 4, we know that Mayor McCready and the town's Dr. Lousy both chose to settle in a farmstead instead of living in Bigtown and raised their child Duncan themselves, which is pretty much the choice you would expect all Bigtowners to make given the sad state of affairs that we find the town in. Given these distinctly opposing options, the only viable solution seems to be a combination of all 3, where Lamplighters adopt orphans they find in the wastes, keep the odd child who may be born within even Little Lamplight itself, and taken the odd child Bigtown parents leave on their doorstep. This combination of different sources for new children does provide some semblance of a self-sustaining population with just enough possibility of new genes introduced that inbreeding is not a major concern, though it's still not something that we should ignore. However, this solution comes with a very large number of single points of failure. What happens if Little Lamplight goes too long without coming across orphaned Wastelanders? What happens if Bigtown improves enough that they are no longer willing to send their children to Little Lamplight? What happens if important knowledge and skill sets are neglected to the point that they are lost forever? What happens if anyone looks at a calendar and realizes the 23rd of October 2077 was a Saturday and we're forced to ask why school was in session? Regardless of how we choose to fill in these plot holes, it simply goes without saying that while it's engaging to find and interact with this child society, when it comes to examining how it could possibly exist in the real world, the lore, much like this outro, is lousy.